Deep inside a wildlife sanctuary, a massive grizzly bear cried out in pain, its leg mangled in. An old steel trap meant for predators. Rangers rushed to help, but it wasn't a human who got there first. What happened next was so unbelievable, so powerful, it stunned experts around the world, because standing just feet from the bear was a 400-pound silverback gorilla. And what he did next shattered everything we thought we knew about animal behavior and revealed a bond no one saw coming. This story will move you in ways you didn't expect. The first scream echoed across the forest just after sunrise. It wasn't human. The rangers at the Cascade Wildlife Rehabilitation Reserve, deep in the Pacific Northwest, were used to morning calls, birds, elk, sometimes the warning cough of a cougar. But this sound was different, raw, panicked, wounded. Eli Ramos, one of the senior animal behaviorists, was already near the eastern range inspecting fencing along the edge of the grizzly enclosure when the sound tore through the air like a blade. He froze, then ran, through trees and brush, across a shallow creek, until he reached a narrow clearing where one of the grizzlies, Maeve, a 6-year-old female, should have been wandering freely through her expansive enclosure. Instead, she was collapsed beside a cluster of downed logs, blood soaking the ground beneath her back leg. A forgotten steeljaw predator trap, illegally left behind by a poacher years before, had snapped shut on her ankle. She was thrashing weakly, breath loud and ragged. Eli didn't hesitate. He radioed the main center, "This is Ramos. I found Maeve. She's trapped. She's alive but losing blood fast." The response was immediate, "Stay back. Tranquilizer team en route." But Eli wasn't alone. Just 20 yards uphill, separated only by a reinforced double fence, was the adjacent enclosure, home to the sanctuary's most unique resident, a massive western lowland silverback named Kito. Kito had arrived 3 years ago after being rescued from an illegal roadside zoo in Eastern Europe. His journey had taken months. Malnourished and deeply traumatized, Kito had surprised everyone with his calm, observant nature. But he was solitary and silent. He never interacted with the grizzlies until now. As Eli prepared to secure the area, he heard something unexpected, a second sound, low, chest-deep, and rhythmic, a series of slow, deliberate grunts. He turned. Kito had approached the far edge of his enclosure. He was watching, not idly, not with curiosity, but with intent. Maeve let out another cry. Kito's head lowered, and he beat his chest once, not in aggression, but in alarm. He paced along the fence, grunting louder now, looking at Eli, then back to Maeve. Then he did something no one had ever seen him do. He sat down, faced the injured bear, and reached one long arm through the lower gap in the security fence, palms open, still, present. Eli froze. This wasn't instinct. This wasn't dominance. It looked like compassion. When the tranquilizer team arrived minutes later, Kito didn't move. He just kept his arms stretched out, facing Maeve, who had gone quiet now, still breathing, still bleeding, but no longer panicked. Almost like she was aware she wasn't alone. And as the rangers sedated her and began the delicate process of removing the trap, no one dared chase Kito away. Because whatever had just started between them, it was real. Maeve was sedated and safely transported to the on-site veterinary barn. Her injury was severe. The trap had broken 2 metatarsals and torn through muscle, but she would survive. The trap, a rusted predator clamp likely buried under years of moss and mud, was an artifact of cruelty no one expected to find still active. The reserve had been declared fully cleared when the enclosures were first built. Eli stayed beside her through surgery, watching every stitch. She would be off her feet for weeks. But even as the medical team worked, his mind wasn't only on Maeve. It was on Kito. The image was burned into his mind, the giant silverback sitting at the edge of his enclosure, one massive arm extended through the steel fencing, body still, as if anchoring Maeve with his presence. It wasn't a fluke. It was intentional. And it wasn't over. The next morning, as Eli returned to Maeve's enclosure to check the gate systems, he saw him again, Kito, waiting. He was perched at the edge of the slope that overlooked her habitat. Not pacing, not agitated, just watching. Maeve, drowsy from sedatives but conscious, was lying beneath a large pine. When Kito saw her move, he huffed softly, a kind of breathy, deliberate exhale. Maeve turned her head slowly, and they locked eyes. Eli stared from behind the inner gate, stunned. Then he did something he wasn't supposed to. He pulled out his phone and filmed it. Not for likes. Not for clicks. To prove it, because no one would believe this otherwise. That afternoon, during the staff meeting, Eli played the footage. The room went silent. Even Dr. Yvonne Richter, the lead ethologist and notorious skeptic, stared wide-eyed at the screen. "This is," she murmured. "It's cross-species nonverbal recognition. He's not mimicking. He's responding." "But how?" someone asked. "They're not bonded animals. They've never even interacted." Dr. Richter folded her arms. "Empathy isn't domesticated. It's ancient. It's instinctive. And apparently, it's not exclusive to us." By day 4, Kito had created a routine. Every morning, just after feeding, he would walk to the same spot overlooking Maeve's enclosure. He would sit and wait. Sometimes he vocalized in low, calm grunts. Sometimes he simply watched. Maeve no longer reacted with alarm. She seemed to settle when he was nearby, her breathing slowing, her eyes tracking his movements with quiet alertness. One morning, as rain pattered gently over the trees, Kito did something new. He stood and beat his chest 3 times, slow, steady. Then he sat down. Maeve shifted, and for the first time since the injury, she let out a low rumbling sound that wasn't pain. It was acknowledgement. The Rangers began calling the moment a bridge event. 2 species. 2 survivors. 2 beings who had no reason to understand each other, and yet they did. It wasn't just instinct. It wasn't a trick. It was something deeper, something no cage could contain. The video was only 47 seconds long. It started with Kito sitting quietly in his observation spot, his back broad and still. Then the frame shifted to Maeve, still recovering, her injured leg splinted and wrapped. She turned her massive head toward him, then slowly, unbelievably, made a low vocalization, soft and steady. The camera caught Kito's chest rising with a long breath before he reached for a pine branch beside him and snapped it off, gently rolling it between his fingers. That was it. No tricks, no dramatics. But the video reached over 1.3 million views in 2 days. Eli hadn't meant for it to go viral. He posted it in a private conservation forum for discussion. Someone shared it, then another, and suddenly the sanctuary's inbox was filled with news requests, ethologists, skeptics, believers, and thousands of comments from people around the world. "This is the most powerful thing I've seen this year. Don't tell me animals can't feel empathy. That gorilla knows. He knows she's hurt." The sanctuary had always received occasional media attention, successful rescues, medical breakthroughs, community events. But this was different. They weren't being asked about species behavior. They were being asked about connection. For Eli, it wasn't fame. It was pressure. Because every morning, Kito still came to the same spot. Every day, Maeve still noticed him. And something more subtle had started to happen. Kito wasn't just watching, he was mimicking healing. In the early mornings, when the mist still clung to the ground, Kito had begun lying down on his side in the exact posture Maeve slept in, one leg curled, head against his arm, facing the hill every single day. And each time, Maeve watched him with soft, focused eyes. One afternoon, while clearing brush near the edge of Kito's space, Eli slipped on a wet root. The noise startled both animals. Maeve bolted upright, panic rising. Kito let out a sharp, controlled bark, not aggressive, but firm. Maeve froze, then calmed. And Eli just stared. "This is not random," he said aloud, breathless. Kito had regulated her. The staff began observing the pair officially. The term cross-species co-regulation entered the daily logs. Maeve's recovery, once expected to take 3 months, was ahead of schedule. She was eating more, moving more. And when Kito was out of sight, she looked for him. It was no longer about novelty. It was relationship. It started as coincidence, then became routine. But now the world began to see it for what it truly was, a bond born not of training, but of trust. By the end of the second week, the reserve was no longer quiet. Reporters began camping outside the gate. Drones buzzed overhead, despite the sanctuary's no-fly zone request. Phone calls flooded in from universities, activists, skeptics, and corporate entities offering sponsorship deals. What had once been a protected moment between two survivors was quickly becoming a spectacle. And Maeve was showing signs of stress, not toward Kito, never toward Kito, but toward the unnatural intrusion pressing in from all sides. Her appetite dipped. Her pace slowed. Her sleep pattern shifted. Eli was furious. This was supposed to be sacred, he told Dr. Richter during a late-night debrief. She nodded, arms folded. "They're not reacting to science," she said. "They're reacting to meaning. And they're trying to own it." To protect them both, the sanctuary board proposed temporarily blocking Kito's access to the eastern slope, the place he came every morning to watch Maeve. Eli fought it. So did Richter. So did nearly the entire animal care team. But under pressure from outside oversight, the board approved a 10-day barrier. It went up overnight. The next morning, Kito approached the new gate. He sat as usual, but when he saw the reinforced mesh that now blocked his view, he stood. Not angry, confused. He let out a low grunt, then another. He paced, not like an animal in distress, but like someone who had been shut out from something he didn't understand. Maeve searched for him that morning. She circled the perimeter of her enclosure for over an hour. She vocalized low, deliberate moans, the kind that had first pulled Kito toward her. But this time, he didn't appear. Because he couldn't. By day 3, Maeve stopped eating. By day 4, she tore at the bark of the same tree she used to rest under, with visible agitation. Kito, meanwhile, remained near the gate every morning, fingers hooked into the fence, just sitting, facing the direction of the slope, watching nothing and waiting. Eli had seen enough. Late that night, he walked out to the barrier with bolt cutters in his hand. He looked over both shoulders. Then he cut it. 2 panels, just enough. The next morning, Kito was back on the slope. He sat quietly. Maeve saw him immediately, and from her place near the trees, she let out a soft, breathy sound, half growl, half sigh. She lay down facing him, and for the first time in 4 days, she closed her eyes. The next staff log read, heart rate stabilized. Appetite returned. Kito access restored, unofficially. And in Eli's private notes, this isn't about research anymore. This is about protection. What they have is real. I'll break every rule I have to defend it. When the world tried to turn something sacred into a show, one man broke the rules to let compassion breathe again. The first snow of the season came early. By late October, a thin white layer had blanketed the sanctuary grounds, frosting pine branches and muting the usual morning sounds. The air was sharp and still. Maeve hadn't stood fully in over a month. Though her wound had healed well, her strength had lagged. Vets suspected trauma, hesitation. The kind of fear that doesn't just fade when the pain stops. She would shift, sit, stretch, but never bear full weight on her back right leg. Until that morning. Eli arrived early, before sunrise, thermos in hand, eyes already scanning the slope. Kito was there. Of course he was. He had returned every day since Eli cut the barrier. Maeve was already awake too, sitting under the cedar tree closest to the edge of her enclosure. The snow made her fur seem darker, her breath visible with each slow exhale. Kito didn't move. He didn't grunt. He simply sat, steady, quiet, present. And then Maeve moved. Not a shuffle, not a stretch. She rose. At first slowly, her weight shifting between her front paws and her good rear leg. Then, with a strained huff, she placed pressure on the injured one. The staff watching through scopes from the main building gasped. Dr. Richter's hand flew to her mouth. She's standing. Fully. Square. Balanced. Maeve blinked toward the slope. Kito tilted his head, a subtle gesture, barely perceptible, then gently tapped the ground with his knuckles. Once. Maeve stepped forward. One pace, then another. Slow. Sure. Eli radioed the observation tower. Get video. No. Quietly, Maeve didn't stop until she reached the fence. On the other side, Kito had moved too, right to the line, facing her. And then something astonishing happened. He sat back and raised his arm, slowly extending it through the lowest panel of the barrier, just like he had the day she was found. Maeve lowered her head and nudged the fence with her muzzle until it touched his knuckles. Silence. The kind of silence that vibrates, that hums with meaning. Inside the control room, no one spoke. A few wept quietly. And in a remote office in Portland, where a wildlife policy official had been reviewing complaints about the sanctuary, a short clip of the moment arrived by private email. No music. No captions. Just a gorilla and a grizzly bear remembering each other. Hours later, the official would reply, "You win. Let them be." She stood not because she was ready, but because he never stopped waiting. And in that step, the wild reminded us all what patience looks like when it's made of love. The storm came without warning, one of those freak mountain weather events that tear down trees and snap lines in minutes. High winds, frozen rain, icy branches crashing into enclosures. The sanctuary's emergency systems activated just before 3 a.m. Eli was on night rotation. He had just finished restocking the primate shelter when the first alarm sounded, Zone B breach, Maeve's enclosure. He ran. So did 2 other rangers. The storm hadn't just broken limbs, it had collapsed part of the inner perimeter fence, a decades-old section behind the pond. When Eli arrived, flashlight in hand, Maeve was gone. No blood. No signs of panic. But the tracks in the fresh snow were clear. She had limped her way across the back trail toward Zone A, toward Kito. The cameras had been knocked offline by the wind, so the only way to know what was happening inside Kito's enclosure was to go there. The staff knew the risk. Maeve was still recovering, unstable on her leg. The terrain was rough. If she panicked, or if Kito reacted unpredictably. But Eli wasn't afraid. He ran through ankle-deep snow, wind biting at his neck. He reached the primate gate just as the others arrived behind him. And when he opened the side viewing door, what he saw made him stop cold. Maeve was inside, standing, breathing heavily just a few feet away from Kito. And not a single muscle between them was tense. Kito sat on one knee, one hand pressed to the ground, eyes fixed on hers. Maeve had her head low, body turned slightly, not in submission, but in recognition. She had come to him. The wind howled. The staff behind Eli readied tranquilizers just in case. But Eli raised a hand. "Don't," he said. "Look at them." And in that storm-lit arena, framed by snow and broken branches, the two creatures who never should have known each other leaned in. Maeve rested her snout near Kito's shoulder. And Kito responded by closing his eyes, slow and deliberate. It lasted barely 10 seconds. Then Maeve turned and walked back toward the gate. No coaxing. No pressure. Just a quiet, instinctual return. By dawn, both animals were safe. The breach was repaired. And the world would never know what truly happened in that snowy enclosure, except for Eli. He would later write in his report. It wasn't an accident. She sought him out. Not out of fear, but out of trust. That moment saved us all. When the fence fell, the wild didn't choose chaos. It chose connection. And what we thought was impossible stood in the snow and proved us wrong. Spring came late to the Cascade Reserve. But when it arrived, it came with gentleness. The snow melted into the streams. The forest floor burst with moss and ferns. And the enclosures, once stiff with silence, filled with movement again. Maeve had fully recovered. She now moved with confidence, no trace of the injury that once left her collapsed in the mud. Her leg, though slightly stiff, no longer limited her. She hunted insects, dug shallow wallows, and even swam in the pond again. But her routine had changed. Each morning, just after dawn, she would make her way to the north fence, the one that overlooked Kito's slope. And every morning, he was already there. They didn't sit as close as before. They didn't need to. Sometimes they only shared a glance. Other days they sat for nearly an hour, breathing the same morning air, their silence more fluent than words. Eli watched it all from a distance. He no longer logged every interaction. The world had tried to make their bond a headline. But here, in the quiet that followed the storm, he let it be something else, a choice. And then came the day everyone feared and no one expected. Kito collapsed in the southern quadrant during his evening walk. There was no struggle, no trauma, just a slow descent to the earth. He was 15 years old, average for a silverback in care, and his heart had finally given out. The staff tried everything. But by nightfall, he was gone. Eli was the one who found Maeve at sunrise. She stood at the fence line, still, alert, waiting. When she didn't see him, she let out a low, rumbling moan, a sound the team hadn't heard since the day he was first removed. Then she turned away, walked back to her tree, and lay down. For the next 5 days, Maeve returned to the fence each morning. She never found him. But on the 6th day, something else happened. At the base of the fence, just where Kito used to sit, the rangers found a pile of small pine branches, carefully stacked, almost deliberately arranged. Not chewed. Not random. Left there like a memory. Like a goodbye. No one could explain it. No one needed to. Because some bonds are not measured in years or scientific data. Some are written in presence, in stillness, in the way a bear learns to walk again because a gorilla chose not to turn away. And in the way the wild remembers those who stood beside them when no one else did. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share it with someone who believes compassion crosses all boundaries, even species. Because when empathy is real, the wild listens.